I never thought the most important moment of my life would begin with me tasting blood on my mother's living room carpet. The first thing I noticed when I hit the floor was how soft it was. Isn't that a strange thing to register? You'd think, when your mother's open palm connects with your cheek hard enough to snap your head sideways, hard enough to send you stumbling into the edge of the oak bookshelf your father never dusted, you'd think the first thing your brain would grab onto would be pain, or shock, or the way the room tilts suddenly like a ship taking water. But no, the first thing I noticed was the carpet. Cream-colored, thick pile, the kind that costs more than a month of someone's rent. I had bought it 2 Christmases ago after my mother had mentioned once, just once, over a phone call she ended early because her show was starting, that she'd always wanted something soft underfoot in the living room, something that felt like money, something real. I had spent 3 evenings researching pile density and fiber grades. I had paid $1,800 for it on my personal card without telling anyone, without expecting anything in return. Except maybe this, that the woman who raised me would not one day stand above me while I lay on it, breathing hard through her nose, and say absolutely nothing at all. My name is Selena Marsh. I am 29 years old. I have a master's degree in information systems from Boston University, and as of 14 months ago, a position as technology manager at a mid-size IT firm called Cloud Vertex Technologies, the kind of role that people spend entire careers building toward, the kind that comes with a team of 11, a corner office on the 14th floor, and occasionally, on very short notice, the chance to fly across the country to present to a client worth millions. I grew up in a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio, in a house that looked perfectly comfortable from the outside. Beige siding, black shutters, a front porch with a swing that nobody ever sat on. My mother, Patricia, worked part-time at a dental office 3 days a week and spent the remaining 4 reorganizing spaces that didn't need reorganizing and calling it productivity. My father, Dennis, had managed a regional hardware chain for 18 years until the company sold and restructured, at which point he had settled, without apparent distress, into a permanent state of half-watching television and fully resenting the world for not appreciating him more. And then there was Grace. Grace was 25, 4 years younger than me, and possessed of the absolute, unshakable serenity of someone who has never once been permitted to face a consequence. She had left one university after a single semester because the dining hall gave her anxiety. She had turned down 2 job offers, one in a marketing firm, one in a nonprofit, because she'd felt, she said, that the energy wasn't right. She had spent the past year and a half building what she called her lifestyle platform online, which, as far as I could tell, consisted of filming herself doing morning routines in matching sets and writing captions about intentional living. She had 1,400 followers. She had monetized exactly none of it. What she had instead was me. What they all had without ever quite saying so aloud was me. For 6 years, every single month, automatically and silently, I had paid the following: the mortgage on their 4-bedroom house in the Cincinnati suburb of Hyde Park, $2,150 per month. The lease on the Toyota Camry my father had arranged in Grace's name as an investment in her brand, $940 per month. The household utilities, electric, gas, water, averaging $380 per month. Internet and streaming services, $190 per month. A grocery auto delivery subscription, $640 per month. Total, $4,300 per month, $51,600 per year, for 6 years. If you're doing the math, yes, I know exactly what it adds up to. It had started the way these things always start, gradually, reasonably, with the very best of intentions. When my father first lost his job, I sent $300 for groceries, just once, just to help. Then the mortgage came up short, and I covered it because it was an emergency. And surely it was only temporary. But in my family, just this once was a mechanism, and temporary was a trap. 1 bill became 2, 1 month became a year, 1 year became 6. And in all that time, through all those automatic transfers, through all those quietly covered shortfalls, they never once said thank you. What they said instead was, "You know how your father's been struggling." What they said was, "Grace needs to focus on her platform right now." What they said, in 1,000 different ways, was, "You can afford it." as if affordability was the same thing as consent, as if the money I earned with my mind and my time and my spine belonged to them simply because I had it and they wanted it. I had been telling myself for 6 years that this was love. I know now what it actually was. Here is what happened the week everything broke open. I had been in back-to-back client calls for 4 straight days when my assistant James sent me the notification I had been dreading. The Vanderholt Enterprises final presentation had been moved up, not postponed, moved up. The Boston meeting, which I had been building toward for 2 months, was now in 48 hours instead of the 10 days I'd budgeted. Vanderholt Enterprises was the kind of client that changes careers, a cutting-edge technology infrastructure company with a $2.7 million consulting contract on the table. My firm, Cloud Vertex Technologies, had been in a 3-way competitive bid for the better part of a year. I was the lead. My name was on every slide of that pitch deck. My continued employment, not just my bonus, my actual continued employment, was directly tied to whether I walked into that conference room in Boston and delivered the presentation. My flight was booked for the following morning, Cincinnati to Boston, 6:45 a.m. The airline canceled it at 8:30 p.m. the night before. Mechanical issue. The next available direct flight didn't leave until 3:15 p.m. the following day, 2 hours after my meeting was scheduled to begin. My car was at the dealership, routine brake service I'd booked a week ago. The service manager, a kind man named Phil who had known me for years, was genuinely sorry. The parts hadn't come in. There was nothing he could do. Every rental agency within 20 miles was sold out. Some regional sales conference had absorbed the entire local inventory. There was one agency on the industrial edge of the city, a small, dingy operation called Fastway Auto that had a single car available, a 2004 Volkswagen Golf with 200,000 miles on it, and reviews that mentioned with some frequency a persistent smell of old cigarettes and something the reviewers called diplomatically previous occupant. $200 for a 48-hour rental, surge pricing. I booked it as a backup, because first I drove to my parents' house, because the Toyota was sitting in their driveway, and I thought, naively, with the particular naivete of someone who still can't fully accept that their family is exactly what it actually is, they will undoubtedly provide me with a car for the trip to Boston, since this is a matter of my career. I knocked at 9:45. My mother answered in what I can only describe as aggressive domesticity, dish towel over one shoulder, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the physical posture of a woman who had decided before the door opened that this conversation was an inconvenience. I explained everything, clearly, calmly, flight canceled, car in the shop, $2.7 million meeting in Boston in 16 hours. I need to borrow the Toyota. For 48 hours, I will fill the tank, I will pay for a detail, I will be careful. My father looked up from the television. Grace, on the sofa, my sofa, under my roof, looked up from her phone with the serene, glazed patience of someone who has never once been permitted to face a consequence.
Your sister needs a car tonight. She is going with her friends to a planned night party, my mother said. I turned to Grace. I kept my voice level. Grace, I said, this is my career. This meeting could determine whether I keep my job. The car is sitting in the driveway. Can I please borrow it for 2 days? You'll take a taxi to the night party. Grace blinked at me, and what I saw in her face wasn't malice. It was something almost worse than malice. It was genuine, bottomless indifference. I have a party planned for tonight, she said. I've been stressed. Your night party? I said carefully. You're choosing your night party over my career. You always do this, my father said, not looking up from the television. You always make everything about you. And then my mother hit me. I want to be precise about this because the details matter, and I have had a long time to sit with them. She crossed the room in 3 steps. She hit me with an open palm, full force, across my left cheek. The sound was very loud in that quiet house. My head snapped sideways. My teeth caught the inside of my cheek. I stumbled into the bookshelf, my bookshelf, the one I'd carried in from my first apartment as a housewarming gift. And then my legs softened, and I went down, slowly, like a building deciding to fold, onto that cream-colored carpet. The world rang, white and high-pitched and very far away. I don't know how long I was on the floor, probably 4 seconds, probably less. What I know is that when I looked up, my father had gone back to his program, Grace had gone back to her phone, and my mother was standing over me, dish towel still on her shoulder, breathing steadily. She did not offer her hand. She did not say she was sorry. She said, "You shouldn't have raised your voice." I had not raised my voice. I stood up, I straightened my jacket, I looked at all 3 of them in turn, in this house I was paying for, on this carpet I had bought, in this life they had all constructed on the silent foundation of my unacknowledged labor. And I walked out. I want you to remember this moment, because what happens next will change everything, and not just for me. 8 hours in a car that smelled like someone else's bad decisions, and somewhere in that darkness, I made mine. The Volkswagen smelled exactly like the reviews promised. I paid the $200, took the keys from a teenager named Marcus who didn't look up from his textbook, and pulled out of the Fastway lot at 10:22 p.m. I stopped at a gas station, bought a bag of ice, a bottle of water, and a packet of ibuprofen, and sat in the parking lot for exactly 5 minutes with ice pressed against my face, taking inventory. The cheek was swollen, the inside of my mouth had a cut that would bother me for days, the bruise was going to be visible tomorrow, and I would need good concealer and a reason to apply it carefully. I had my laptop, my presentation was backed up in 4 places, my meeting was in approximately 13 hours. I had everything I needed. I pulled onto the highway at 10:41 p.m., heading northeast into a wall of rain, and for the first hour I didn't think about any of it. I just drove. I let the windshield wipers do their rhythm, and I let the road be the only thing that existed. And then, somewhere in the mountains of Pennsylvania, with the rain coming sideways and the Volkswagen shuddering at every gust, my phone on the passenger seat lit up with an email notification. It was from my therapist, Dr. Lena Park. She kept late hours for clients like me, clients she knew had a habit of needing clarity at inconvenient times. She had sent it, she said, because she'd been thinking about our last session, about the question she'd asked me that I hadn't fully answered. What would change, Selena, if you stopped making it so comfortable for them not to change? I had been thinking about that question for 11 weeks. I had not done nothing in those 11 weeks. I want to be very clear about that, because the events of the next 24 hours might make it look like a snap decision, like a woman running on adrenaline and bruised pride making choices she'd regret in the morning. That is not what this was. 2 months earlier, quietly, without ultimatum or announcement, I had called the mortgage servicer and removed myself as an authorized third-party payer. The account was in my father's name. The debt was in my father's name. I had simply, deliberately, stopped covering something that was never mine to carry. I had thought about it for 11 weeks before I made that call. I had sat in Dr. Park's calm office in the Anderson building, and I had cried about it and argued with myself about it, and ultimately arrived at the only honest conclusion available. Paying for them had never been love. It had been fear. Fear that if I stopped, they'd confirm what I had always suspected, that my value to them was entirely financial and not relational at all. I had stopped the mortgage to test that fear. They had not noticed for 2 months. That was, in its own way, the answer. Now, at 11:18 p.m., on a rain-soaked highway in Pennsylvania, with ice still pressed against my face and 8 hours of driving ahead, I opened my banking app at a red light and I finished what I had started. Toyota Lease Auto Pay, canceled. Utilities, electric, gas, water, removed. Internet and streaming, deleted. Grocery auto delivery, canceled. I called the mortgage servicer's overnight line and spoke with a woman named Carol, who confirmed in the calm, practiced tone of someone who has had this conversation many times that a formal notice of default would be generated and mailed within 3 to 5 business days. 2 months of outstanding balance, approximately $12,000. I thanked her. Then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove. I drove through the rain and the dark and the long stretch of I-90 with nothing but the radio for company, and I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that. I felt something quieter and much harder to name, the particular emotional exhaustion of someone who has just done something irrevocable and knows it and has chosen it anyway. I thought about Grace on that sofa, phone in hand, watching her sister on the floor. I thought about my father and his television. I thought about my mother's hand. And somewhere around 3 a.m. in the middle of Massachusetts, the rain finally eased. The clouds broke just enough to show a strip of stars, thin and cold and very far away. The Volkswagen rattled, and the heater made a noise it probably shouldn't have, and I rolled the window down an inch and breathed the wet road smell and thought, I am still here. I drove through the worst of it, and I am still here. I arrived in Boston at 6:44 a.m. The Kimpton Hotel had given me a room on the 9th floor with a window that faced east. I showered for exactly 11 minutes. I applied concealer to the bruise on my cheek with the focused precision of someone who cannot afford to look like what she feels like today.
2 layers, a setting powder, a blending sponge I had bought at an airport 3 trips ago and never thrown away. Then I put on my charcoal blazer, the one I had pressed and packed the day before any of this had happened, back when the world was still predictable. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself for a long moment. I didn't look like a woman who had been slapped by her mother and driven 8 hours through a storm. I looked like exactly what I was, a professional who had something important to say and knew exactly how to say it. I put on red lipstick. I don't always, but I did that day. I walked into that conference room carrying everything they had done to me, and I turned it into the best work of my life. The Vanderholt Enterprises offices occupied the 31st floor of a glass tower on Atlantic Avenue, with a view of the harbor that, on a clear morning, looked like something out of a film about people whose problems are elegant and distant. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and new leather. I was met at the elevator by a woman named Claire from their executive coordination team, who looked at me with the professionally neutral expression of someone who was actively choosing not to acknowledge my slightly swollen cheek. I appreciated that more than she knew. Their chief technology officer, Richard Vanderholt III, yes, the third, was already seated at the head of the table when I walked in, 53, silver-haired, with the contained, evaluative energy of a man who had heard 1,000 pitches and long since stopped being impressed by confidence alone. He wanted precision. He wanted proof. He wanted someone who could look him in the eye and tell him not just what she was selling, but why she was the only person in the room who truly understood what he needed. To his left sat their VP of Innovation, Dr. Amara Singh. Brilliant, incisive, the kind of woman who asks the question you were hoping no one would think to ask. To his right, their head of legal and a financial analyst whose name I didn't catch, but whose presence told me the number on the contract was already a serious discussion. I set my laptop on the table. I looked at Richard Vanderholt and I said, "Thank you for having me. Let me show you something." For the next 3 hours, I presented. I presented through the ache in my cheek and the exhaustion behind my eyes, and the particular weight of someone who has been awake for 20 hours and has the kind of stakes on the table that leave no room for anything but precision. I answered every question. I anticipated the technical pushbacks, the budget challenges, the implementation timeline concerns. Dr. Singh asked me something in the second hour that I hadn't fully prepared for, a question about phased scalability that required me to rebuild part of my argument on the fly, in real time, in front of 5 people whose opinion of me was worth $2.7 million. I rebuilt it.
not flawlessly, but honestly, and with a clarity that I think surprised even me. Richard Vanderholt, who had maintained the careful, neutral expression of a man withholding judgment, leaned forward slightly at the end of the third hour. He asked me a single question. Why cloud vertex technologies? Not in theory, why you, specifically, personally, should be the person guiding this transition. I had constructed the answer to that question for 2 months. I had refined it in my head during 8 hours of rain-soaked Pennsylvania highway, and I gave it to him. I watched his expression move through 3 distinct states: skeptical, considering, and then finally something that looked like cautiously decided. Dr. Singh shook my hand on the way out. She held it a moment longer than a standard handshake and said, quietly, "That was very good work." I thanked her. I took the elevator alone down. And in the lobby of that glass tower, standing on cold marble with the harbor visible through the front doors, I let myself shake for exactly 30 seconds. My hands, my jaw, the particular trembling of a body that has been holding itself together through an act of pure disciplined will and has only just been given permission to let go. 30 seconds. Then I straightened my blazer, walked out into the Boston afternoon, and went back to my hotel to wait. The call came 14 hours later. James forwarded the email at 11:07 p.m. with a string of capital letters that was genuinely unprecedented in our working relationship. Cloud Vertex Technologies had been selected. Contract value at initial scope, $2.7 million. My managing director, Catherine Lowe, 22 years at the firm, a woman who communicated in precise, carefully rationed words, sent me a message that said simply, "Exceptional. We need to talk about your future here." I was sitting on my hotel balcony when I read it. 9th floor, facing east, with a glass of red wine and the Boston skyline going copper in the late evening light. The harbor was very still. A ferry was crossing, small and bright, leaving a white line behind it on the dark water. I sat with the feeling for a moment, not triumph exactly, something quieter, something that felt less like winning and more like arriving somewhere I had always been meant to be and had taken a very long way to reach. That was when my phone rang, my mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I did, and what I heard next, I wasn't prepared for it, not even close. She called to ask about the Wi-Fi. She didn't ask about my cheek. "The internet's out," my mother said. No greeting, no "how did it go," no "are you all right," just the pressing, practical emergency of a household that had lost its streaming service. "Hello, Mom," I said. "The internet is completely out, and something's wrong with the grocery app. It says the subscription is canceled. Did you change something?" I looked at the ferry crossing the harbor. I thought about Carol from the mortgage servicer's overnight line. I thought about the notice of default that had been generated 3 days ago and should have arrived in their mailbox by now. I stopped the payments. Silence. Then, "What do you mean you stopped them?" "The automatic payments. All of them. I stopped them." The silence on her end had a particular quality, the held breath quality of someone recalibrating, deciding which tool to reach for first. My mother has what I think of as a management system for difficult conversations. First dismissal, then redirection, then if neither works, volume. She went straight to volume. She told me I was being childish. She told me I was punishing the whole family over a disagreement. She used the word disagreement for what she had done to my face, and I noted that with the steady, unblinking attention of someone filing evidence. Then my father took the phone. His voice was different, lower, the specific register he used when he wanted to establish that a conversation had consequences. He told me I had responsibilities to this family. He told me I was being vindictive. He said, and I want you to understand that he said this, actually said this, that I should think very carefully about what I was doing. "Before you finish that thought, go check the mailbox." I heard him pause. "What?" "Go check the mailbox, Dad. There should be something there for you." I listened to the sounds carry through the phone from 1,200 miles away. The creak of his chair, his footsteps on the hardwood floor I had helped refinish 4 years ago, the front door, the porch steps, the small metallic creak of the mailbox opening, paper. Silence. And then a sound I had never in 29 years heard from my father. A sound like the air going out of something. What is this? His voice had changed completely. All the authority had drained out of it. What was left was something stripped and bewildered. Notice of default. $12,000 past due, Selena. What is this? That's 2 months of missed mortgage payments, I said. I stopped the automatic transfer 60 days ago. Will, the house... He couldn't finish the sentence. Selena, this is our home. I know, I said. I've been paying for it for 6 years. There was a commotion in the background then. My mother's voice, high and sharp, and then Grace, not talking, screaming. My car! Mom, there's a truck outside. They're taking my car. I had called the Toyota leasing company from the Pennsylvania highway at 2 a.m. I had confirmed with a representative named Kevin that a repossession order would be initiated the moment the next scheduled payment failed to process. Kevin had walked me through the timeline with the brisk efficiency of someone who has had this conversation professionally many times. The repo truck had arrived on schedule. I listened to my sister scream. I listened to my father make soft, broken sounds. I listened to my mother call my name, Selena, 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 like it was something that could reach me across the distance I had put between us. And then my father came back on the line, and the threat voice was entirely gone, and what replaced it was something I had genuinely never heard from him before. Begging. Raw, unmasked, desperate begging. He called me sweetheart. He called him his girl. He said he was sorry. Mother lost his temper. Please, Selena, please. We can fix this. We can talk about this. I'm going to give you a phone number, I said. He went quiet. His name is Robert Finch. He's a HUD-certified housing counselor. He has over 20 years of experience with exactly this situation. He can help you explore your options. Loan modification, a repayment plan, potentially a short sale if it comes to that. I paused. I already called him on your behalf. He's expecting to hear from you. Selena, that's what I have for you tonight, I said. I hope you use it. I hung up. The harbor was still. The ferry had made it to the other side. The wine in my glass had gone slightly warm, and I drank the rest of it anyway, and I sat in the quiet of my own company for a long time. I didn't feel like a villain. I didn't feel like a hero either. I felt like someone who had just, after a very long time, put down something so heavy that they hadn't even realized. But here's what I didn't know yet. The story wasn't over. My mother still had one more move to make, and it was the one I never saw coming. Some doors, once closed, cannot be reopened, and some things once put down must never be picked back up. What happened in the weeks that followed was not dramatic. Life after the dramatic parts rarely is. My father called Robert Finch. I know this because Robert, with my father's signed consent, sent me a brief confirmation. The initial consultation had taken place, and they were pursuing a loan modification. It was uncertain. It was, as it had always been, in my father's name, his problem, his process, his responsibility. Finally, at last, and perhaps for the first time in my memory, Grace moved out of the house within 3 weeks, without the Toyota, without the grocery delivery, without the comfortable infrastructure of my invisible support. She called a friend in the neighborhood and arranged a spare bedroom. She found a job within the month, a waitressing position at a cafe called The Morning Table, a 10-minute walk from where she was staying. I heard about this from a mutual friend. My parents, I learned through the housing counselor's updates, had both taken work. My mother, who spent 3 days a week at a dental office and the rest of her time redecorating rooms that didn't need to be redecorated, was now washing dishes at a restaurant 3 evenings a week. My father had taken a position driving delivery for a regional logistics company, the same cafe where Grace waitressed. I don't know if they had arranged that deliberately or if it was simply what was available. I found myself thinking about them there. My mother at the industrial sink, my father in his truck, Grace carrying plates, and I felt something complicated that I couldn't easily name. Not satisfaction, not grief exactly, something in between. The feeling of watching people finally become acquainted with the texture of a life they had spent years allowing someone else to fund. There was one more call. 2 weeks after Boston, my mother called on a Tuesday evening. I was on my balcony, my apartment balcony now, in the Pearl District of Cincinnati, the one I'd moved into 4 months earlier when I'd finally stopped justifying to myself why I was still renting a small studio when I could afford something better. She said she wanted to talk about what had happened, that there had been a misunderstanding, that everyone had said things in the heat of the moment. I let her finish. "Mom," I said carefully, "I'm happy to have a different conversation, but it can only start in one place. It has to start with you acknowledging what you did in that living room and what you said afterwards, not your version of it, what actually happened." A pause. "I just think we both—" "I know. Call me when you're ready to start from the truth." I hung up. She hasn't called back. I went to see Dr. Park the week I returned from Boston. I sat in her office, the calm, plant-filled room with the good afternoon light, and I told her everything: the slap, the drive, the presentation, the balcony, the repo truck and my sister's screaming, and my father's voice losing all its hardness. She listened with the particular focused stillness she had that made you feel both examined and safe. When she finished, she asked the question she always asked: "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly, the way she'd taught me to. Not the polished, socially acceptable answer, but the real one, the one that lives underneath. "Clean," I said, like I put something down that had been changing the shape of my spine. She nodded slowly. Catherine Lowe followed through with her message.
3 months after Boston, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Technology at Cloud Vertex Technologies. I have a team of 14 now, a client portfolio I am genuinely proud of, and a corner office on the 16th floor with a window that faces east and catches the morning light in a way that I have not yet gotten tired of. I still drive a used Volkswagen. Not the rental, obviously, a different one. Newer by 8 years, bought secondhand from a lot in Norwood because it was reliable and sensible and did not require me to justify its existence to anyone. There's something I value, increasingly, about things that simply do their job without performance. I have thought many times late at night in the quiet of my own apartment about whether I did the right thing. I've examined it from enough angles to understand that it isn't a simple question. My parents may still lose their house. The loan modification is uncertain, and the math is difficult. That is real. It is hard. Some part of me carries the weight of it, and I expect some part of me always will. But here is what I know. You can love people and still refuse to fund a version of their lives that requires you to make yourself small. You can grieve the family you deserved and still choose to walk away from the one you actually got. You can stand up from a carpet you bought with your own money in a house you paid for with your own labor and decide, quietly, permanently, without screaming, that this was the last time. The very last time. I am 29 years old. I have a 16th floor office and a reading corner with a beautiful carpet and a balcony I use in all weather. I have a therapist who writes down things I say and a team that trusts me and work that makes me proud. And I have this, the knowledge, earned the hardest possible way, that I was always the one worth loving, that the money was never the point, that the point, the whole, aching, irreducible point, was this: I am worth more than what I can provide. I always was. It just took 6 years of monthly transfers, 1 canceled flight,
One rain-soaked highway, and my mother's open hand against my face to finally make me stop waiting for someone else to tell me so first. The ferry was still crossing the harbor when I hung up the phone that night. I watched it all the way to the other side. Then I went inside, poured the last of the wine, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in years.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.